Welcome to Global Development Interrupted. My name is Leah Petit, and for the last 18 years, I've been working in international development. That is until January of 2025, when the Trump administration took office and looked at the federal budget and saw that 1% of it went to foreign assistance. And they thought that's where they're going to find the real cost savings for the American people. So they cut it. And along with cutting it, they dismantled the U.S. Agency for International Development, also known as USAID. I, along with many of my colleagues, lost our jobs. But we didn't just lose our jobs. We were also demonized. Overnight, we were told that we were radical lunatics and criminals because we pursued a profession that focused on making the world a safer, healthier, and more equitable place to live. In this podcast, I'm going to let you in on a secret. We aren't radical lunatics. I'm going to be introducing you to those so-called radical lunatics and criminals. We're going to learn how they got into international development, the programs they were working on before the foreign assistance cuts, and why those programs are still important today, both globally and here at home in the United States. In this first episode, we get to meet Lauren Murphy, one of my favorite former USAID colleagues. She was a senior technical advisor for orphans and vulnerable children in the Office of HIV and AIDS. I want to note that in this episode, we say two different acronyms quite often, which is OVC, which stands for Orphans and Vulnerable Children, as well as PEPFAR, which is the Presidential Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, a pot of funding within the foreign assistance budget that is spread across agencies within the United States government to combat HIV worldwide. So with that said, let's get into it and let's learn a little bit more about Lauren. Hi, Lauren. Welcome to the show.
Well, hi. Thank you for having me.
But we're just going to start with your name, where you're currently sitting, and then how did we meet? I keep forgetting.
Yes. So hi. So my name is Lauren Murphy. I am sitting in Maryland outside the capital, Annapolis, and we met. We met at USAID.
Yes, we met at USAID.
Yes.
I feel like you were on a bunch of calls with me.
Yes, we were both on the Zambia team. And I learned that you had been an RPCV, or you are an RPCV, returned peace volunteer, and you had served in Cameroon. And I served in Gabon. And so I think I reached out to you and set up like a coffee date.
So one of the things that we do with the show is a fun fact icebreaker. So whether you love it or you hate it, I'm still going to ask you, what was your go-to fun fact when you worked at USAID?
I always did that I met my husband in Peace Corps Gabon. And I did that one because there are so many Peace Corps volunteers who work at USAID. And then also my husband's like my favorite person in the universe. So I got to talk about those two aspects and connect with people.
You know, and I love that about you too. Whenever I ask about your husband, you're just always like, oh, he's the best. He's the absolute best.
He is. And he's helped me so much during this time, of uncertainty. He's like, yeah.
I know. I feel the same way. My husband, we didn't meet in Peace Corps, but we got married and went to Peace Corps. And there's definitely a bond there when you do Peace Corps with somebody, regardless.
How could you explain that experience to anyone, right? Unless they are witnessing it with you.
Yeah. I remember trying to explain to someone from West Virginia. We were on a raft trip and he was guiding us and we were talking about improved cook stoves and the importance of improved cook stoves for many women because of the amount of smoke that they get in their lungs without it. And he was like, wait a minute, they don't have ventilation. You need hood covers. And I was like, oh, sir.
Boy, it goes like this.
One of the things that we talk about too on this podcast is what brought you to global development. We know that you worked at USAID, but where did you grow up?
So I am from the south side of Chicago. I grew up in a small Irish Catholic community called Beverly. That was our neighborhood on the south side. And I went to Catholic school. Every year we'd have something called Vocation Day, which is when nuns and priests would come to our school and they would talk about their vocation of being men and women of the cloth. And I remember very clearly there was a nun who came and she was talking about her missionary work. And I was just so fascinated. And I just thought that it was such a worthwhile calling. And I was like, I'm going to be a nun too. So I can help in this like very profound way and like make sure that children had food and clothes. And like, I was like, this is what I'm going to do. So when I was younger, I would always make my sister pretend that we ran an orphanage, which is very strange and like not normal. But I had all these dolls, and we'd have to go out and we'd have to save them and bring them to the orphanage and provide them food. And I had like this whole storyline in my head, which now is like so bizarre because I then many years later became the senior technical advisor for orphans and vulnerable children at USAID. I did
And
not become a nun.
no,
Spoiler alert.
how many kids do you have?
I have 3 children now. But yeah, but I really think that like this call to serve, right, came out of my upbringing and being from the South Side and, growing up around policemen and firemen and nurses and teachers. My mom was a Chicago public school teacher. My dad was a public defender in Chicago. And, I really grew up with a very keen sense of social justice. And, I have a very specific memory of going to watch my dad. He was in the narcotics unit and defend someone, and he actually won the case. And I remember watching this man give my dad this big, huge hug and just thank him for helping him because he like had been given a faulty drug charge. Looking back, and it was really interesting to watch my dad use his privilege, right, as a white man who was able to access education and who so strongly believed in justice to try to provide others that platform.
Yeah.
So that's a huge part of why I wanted to do what I do.
It sounds like social service and community was very important growing up.
For sure.
Like across a lot of different, the nuns, the priests, public servants. So then how did that translate though into global development?
Yeah. So I think I went to school. I wanted to become a journalist. I love to write. I still love to write. I love to be creative. And I wanted to write about Africa, and I wanted to tell stories about Africa, not about disease, not about poverty, not about war, but about the beauty and the culture of Africa. And I decided that I wanted to join the Peace Corps. And then once I was in Peace Corps, I was like, okay, I don't think I want to write about this. I actually want to try to do something. And then after Peace Corps, went to grad school and I went to London School of Economics and got a master's in international development. And became a development practitioner.
So, Lorna, I didn't know that you were always interested in Africa. What sparked the interest in Africa in general?
So, when I was little, my grandpa had these huge maps in his basement, and I would spend hours looking at these maps and was just obsessed with all the different places in the world. And when these nuns would come and talk to us, they had served in Africa and showed us pictures. And I thought I was just called to work in this space. And growing up as a child in the 80s, when Ethiopia was experiencing famine, I remember hearing about these stories and watching as the US was able to provide aid and go in and be the good guys and provide assistance in that way.
How do you explain it when friends or family ask like what you did at USAID?
Sure. So as I mentioned, I worked as an advisor on the orphan and vulnerable children portfolio, which was a part of the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief. So I've been working on PEPFAR for around about 20 years, actually. The last 10 were with USAID, but before that, I worked for Peace Corps, and then I worked for the Office of the Global AIDS Coordinator at State, and then I worked for an implementing partner in South Africa that was funded by CDC. So I've been working on PEPFAR for a long time. PEPFAR, for those who might not know, was started by George W. Bush. And W loved Africa, and he saw that this was something that where the United States could come in and really make a difference, and had the foresight to go to Congress and request a large amount of funding to be able to address the AIDS epidemic globally.
Yeah.
And part of this was trying to work with children and families and communities, and that's where the OVC portfolio comes in. Because in the early 2000s, we basically lost a generation of people because of AIDS. People now, we don't hear a lot about HIV anymore, and you're not seeing like the news stories. But 20 years ago, people were going to funerals every weekend. There's no better business to be in than the coffin business. Folks were dying. And when PEPFAR started, there was about 150,000 people who were receiving ART on the continent.
What's ART?
And oh, sorry, antiretroviral treatment. So it's a medicine that if you can pay for it and you can take it, consistently, can keep you alive. And so with that generation that we lost parents. And so there were a lot of children who were then called AIDS orphans, who had lost their one or both of their parents to AIDS. USAID came in and started an OVC program, which was to go into the communities and identify these children and try to help strengthen communities and families to absorb these children into family care instead of putting them in institutions, because research has shown us that children do better when they're staying with their families.
Which is a real 180 from where you started with your orphanage play.
Oh, I know. I mean, my God. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. And what I hope that people would know is that development is a science, and public health is a science. And when you're coming to this work, you can come with sympathy, you can come with empathy, but at the end of the day, this economics and it's really a science, epidemiology.
And it's learning,
Yeah.
because I remember I had a professor who talked about his experience with the Rwanda genocide and the refugee camp. And they had this program where they said, like, if there are orphans that need support and food, please bring them to the camp, this one tent. And like families were bringing these children to this tent, and the children were just wasting away because they weren't getting love and care that they would have with their families.
Yeah.
And the intent was good. The intent
Yeah.
was, let's make sure that these children are fed and cared for, especially if they have no one to care for them. But what was quickly realized is that children need more than just food. They need love and attention. And this idea of orphan really isolates the child in its own right. Like, a child is not isolated. There is community, there is families, there are networks that can take care of children. And so then he talked about, they switched the program immediately and said, instead of releasing these children to us, we will pay you a stipend so that you can feed this child. And that really revolutionized sort of the orphans and vulnerable children space at the time to what you're talking about now, right? Stopping the institutions into just taking care of families and networks.
Right. And it's a huge part of like my own personal development is like I said, I lived in South Africa and I lived in Zambia, and my whole perspective of things has totally changed. In South Africa, I really learned a lot about the importance of community. And they have this concept called Ubuntu. And it's basically, I am because we are. My humanity is wrapped up in your humanity. And it's a very different way of looking at the world from the Western, very, hyper individualistic kind of perspective. And it's this amazing way of putting community first and how important it is to thrive in community. This concept really helped post-apartheid in South Africa when they were thinking through social justice, or thinking through healing and reconciliation and what that meant for the nation. And so I feel like my life was changed, like working with folks and understanding this concept of Ubuntu and what this means. And so we were able to provide money to communities who then could identify the needs that they saw in the children and families in their communities and prioritize, what had to happen And we married that with the evidence base. And so at the end of the day, we say we tried to keep children healthy, safe, stable, and schooled. And we built our programs around that framework.
Also,
And yeah,
that's one of the reasons I loved working with you. I mean, you just brought this like great attention to detail around the research, but also ensuring that it was infused with the perspective of the people that we were there to work with and help serve.
yeah. And I do think now, as we're looking for new ways to provide aid or to work with countries now that USAID has been dismantled, that it's community-based organizations and faith-based organizations who understand what has to happen better than this old white lady, for sure. Empowering those organizations is going to be really important.
Right. And I felt when we were at USAID, it was really going down that track. How do we look to local entities to speak to what their priorities are? Which always reminds me of what my dad used to tell me. So my dad was a grief counselor, and he would say, people know what they need to do. Often you just need to reflect back to them or ask questions, and then they'll solve it. And I felt like with USAID, that was where we were helping to reflect back, support, and help local entities move towards this more sustainable system where they could thrive by themselves.
And it's hard work, right? Like in some ways, getting medicine, getting pills in mouths is easier because you can count that, right? You can say, okay, we gave this many children antiretrovirals. We provided this many HIV tests. We provided this amount of tuberculosis medication. But when you're working with communities, this is long term. This is building trust, but it's also essential because you will not have success if you don't understand what the needs of the community are.
100%. 100%. And so who were the specific populations that you worked with the most?
So, that's a great, thank you for asking that question. So I kind of described how in the beginning of PEPFAR, we had a lot of children who had been orphaned by AIDS, and we had to identify them, make sure that they were absorbed into families, and try to strengthen the services and referrals for those kids. And so it was kind of a blanket approach. But as time went on and the epidemic evolved, we really narrowed our focus and we became laser focused on the most vulnerable populations because we were really looking to provide the most cost-effective services. This is U.S. taxpayer dollars. You really have to be so accountable. And if I could just let everyone know, when I was in South Africa, when I was in Zambia, I signed my name on that line for every penny, and I knew where every penny of that money was going. And that's really important that folks know that this was done with such intention.
Yeah, and such care.
In such care. We really were focusing on children living with HIV, specifically those children that were experiencing trouble staying on their medication. There's so many barriers for kids, to
Can you
to
provide
take
a
their
couple?
medication. Sure. Oh yeah. So I mean, well, you and I are both moms.
Yes.
We've given our kids antibiotics, right? How hard is it to make sure that they take this delicious, strawberry flavored medicine for 10 days?
Mm-hmm.
These kids are taking medication. And in the beginning, it was granules and it was more than once a day. And you have to remember a lot of these families don't have food in the house.
Right.
A lot of the families don't have, indoor plumbing where you can get fresh, clean water to take the medication. And you have to take it at certain times of day. If mom is out at the market selling tomatoes, it's really hard for her to manage to make sure that the kids are taking their medication. And then there's a lot of stigma with HIV.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I've spoken with a lot of moms who didn't want their partners to know that they were living with HIV and that their kids were living with HIV for fear of domestic violence.
Yeah.
And so there was some shame. and stigma that really had to be worked through. And that's where our community caregivers kind of came in to work with families and talk about disclosure. And it's especially thinking about teens. I knew a lot of teens who had grown up taking this medication and thinking that it was for TB, or thinking, it was for
Right.
hypertension, or whatever they would tell the kids. And then now they're a teenager and they're interested in having relationships, and they're given this news that actually, you've been living with this virus. This disclosure aspect is really difficult. And so we talk about what is age appropriate, and how to have these conversations. So, you're not 16 and finding out this really heavy information.
I know. And I just thinking about the community caregivers, it was also such a radical idea to invest in community members to provide support and medication, but it was also so essential. I remember in Peace Corps, there was a woman who, through one of her visits for her newborn, she was diagnosed with HIV. And I remember the doctor was telling her that she would have to come to the clinic every day to give the syrup to her newborn baby. And I'm watching her walk away from the clinic. She lived like 3 miles away. Was she going to walk every single day to the clinic to give this syrup to this child without really understanding the consequences of what that meant at all? It was almost just watching a woman walk away with a death sentence. And so then the idea then to invest in caregivers within the community where she can go to someone that she trusts and it's not seen as this spectacle is such an important piece that hopefully we haven't lost.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And like with the OVC program, we have these community members who are from that community. They understand the needs of the community, and they provide these household visits where they go in and they check up on the families. And it's actually a very intimate thing, right? To invite someone into your home. But these are folks that speak the same language, that understand where they're coming from, understand the cultural nuances of things that they're dealing with. And just having that, I mean, it means the world to some families. And because they're in that space, they can pick up on abuse. They can pick up on things that you wouldn't, being a busy doctor in a clinic with all these people coming to you. And the clinicians would often say how much they appreciated the OVC programming, because you see folks who come in and they don't have food in the house and they're unemployed, and the children have dropped out of school, and they had a place to refer the kids to try to connect them to services. And that's a big part of what we did, was strengthening these referral systems to try to give people access to services.
And Lauren, you keep mentioning food. Can you explain why that is so important, especially as its connection to HIV/AIDS medication?
Yeah, from working with communities, food is just a really, really huge deal. And I guess, even in the States, right, we have a lot of research that shows that hungry kids don't learn. A huge amount of research that's showing that, especially when children are younger, in the first, 0 to 2, that proper nutrition has a huge effect on the rest of their lives. And we want to have a healthy population, which then makes a productive workforce, which then it helps the economy. Food is a huge deal. And we found, for example, that when we did like parenting groups, if we had a snack, they would be more likely to come. Right.
Right.
People can't take their medication. They can't go to school if they don't have these very basic needs filled. Yeah.
Yeah. And also, it hurts when you take medication on an empty stomach.
It's true, yeah. And a lot of the kids didn't want to take their meds because they would feel dizzy, they feel nauseous. It's not nice. You really do have to have food.
I also, again, a story from my days at school. There was a professor who did this ranking exercise. He was providing an example of one of his experiences, again, in a refugee camp. And he talked about ranking like what people are most concerned about or what was the worst aspect of like what they had just survived. And hunger was one of the top rated things. It just how unbearable it
Yeah.
was. Even like it ranked above torture. And in a way it is kind of torture. But that's
That's
always
interesting.
stuck
I
with
didn't
me.
know that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so what we tried to do was not just give food, right?
Right.
That was not, and especially with PEPFAR, I had to be very clear that PEPFAR was a public health intervention for HIV, and we did not provide food. What we tried to do was create ways to make the household more stable. So there was like, a short term, let's get these folks connected to, the Department of Social Development to get a food parcel, or maybe a local church, to get some mealy meal and some oil. But then on the longer terms, okay, how can we get you into a savings group where folks from your community come together, you share, you put in small bits of what you can every week, and then you share out and you get a larger amount of money, which will then enable you to buy, something for your business or medication that you need for your child. A lot of folks, they had to buy school uniforms for their kids. So getting folks organized and into savings groups was a big part of what we did. And it's also very culturally acceptable. I mean, South Africans have had fail-safe groups for years, right? And then connecting them to markets.
And Lauren, we were so lucky to have visited one of the groups in Zambia that
I did, yes. Oh
right.
my gosh. Oh, I would love to talk
Yeah.
about that. Yeah, that was great.
Just
Well,
fabulous women. They
yeah,
were
they
so
were,
entrepreneurial.
yeah.
And I mean, and this program was essentially just providing support and helping them think through how to create business plans. What did they want to do next? And this group of women were so cool. And they showed us where they had started and the stores that they had
Yeah,
created based on this funding that they had pulled together themselves and what that meant for their individual freedom within the
yes.
community and what they wanted to do next.
It was so empowering for them as
Yes.
women.
And then the support that was provided for the project was essentially, coaches. Have you thought about this? Have you accessed the system, the Zambian system in this way? Versus being like, here's $5 million, ladies. This
And
was
they were
their money
talking, yeah, and they had wanted to then pool the resources that they had obtained up to
generated.
that point to buy a peanut butter making machine, remember? And then they wanted to have that as part of their business. They were awesome.
They were
But
awesome.
again, it was a community led intervention. Yeah.
Yeah. And a lot of the women talked about how, with their financial control, they had more say in the way that they lived their lives and the relationships that they had with whether those be romantic or otherwise, which is also very
Absolutely.
important. Can you share a moment other than just the one we shared where you really saw the impact of your work?
Yeah, I mean, I guess so. We went on a lot of site visits. So, like I mentioned, we really had to take responsibility for this taxpayer money. And
Mhm.
so I did many site visits where we would go and we would visit the organizations. I would look through their case files and make sure that things were in order. And I remember I went on this one site visit to Alexandra, and it's also called Alex. We'll call it Alex. Alex is one of the largest townships in South Africa.
What does township mean?
Basically, there are created about 70,000 stands or houses, right, for like a six-person family. But then the population has grown over time. That what has been happening is they create these backyard shacks. They call them shacks, where they add informal housing to the stands that are already there. It depends where you look, but Alex, built for a population of 70,000, has anywhere between 100,000 to 750,000 people living there, depending on who you ask. But having said that, it's a very vibrant community. A lot of art, a lot of culture comes out of Alex, music. Mandela once lived there. But we were going on a site visit to Alex, and they brought us to see this a shack that where a family lived who had received services from their program. And the program was targeting mothers living with HIV and their children to try to connect them with services. And it focused on positive parenting. So helping them to create toys with things that they had at their disposal, little tin cans and cardboard, and how to engage with kids and focus on, early childhood development in an environment that was very difficult for them to live in. And the outreach worker was telling us how she was able to connect the mom with employment opportunities, and how they were able to work to get birth certificates for the kids, because when you have birth certificates you can then collect social grants, and connecting them to a child support grant, and in order to get some money coming into the household every month. And I remember that the outreach worker started playing with the kid on the floor and showing us these little tools. And then I was sitting there and it was kind of like raining. And I remember like I was getting rained on, and I was just sitting in this shack thinking I'm inside this person's home and I'm like getting wet. And it was a lot. But to see how they had this support network of folks coming into their home and identifying these issues, and then trying to help them provide solutions hand in hand with that family, was definitely encouraging.
As you're speaking, it's just reflecting on how much we in the United States take for granted in terms of just the resources that are provided to us. Like this concept of not having a birth certificate, that's just automatic, right? But it's something that is difficult in many, many countries, is getting that birth certificate and what that means in terms of access. Like the life skills piece of this too, like how to engage with your children. I think of all the Head Start programs that the United States has, or just different resources community groups create that you can tap into. And then just our education system in general. We talk a lot in the global development world about educating women, because then you have stronger families and healthier children. And it's true, which in this regard, this is where USAID was sort of stepping in and saying, how can we create these networks for these families so that they can thrive on their own?
Right. And it was like a strength-based approach. So looking at the communities and understanding what strengths lied in that community and how we could kind of work with those strengths that were there.
Which is very key, because you also don't want to drop in, create an amazing program, and then the funding ends, and then you remove quickly and there's nothing left. Which ironically is where we are today. With the dismantling of USAID, there was an abrupt cut in many of the projects and the services that were working towards a more sustainable approach. But for many, we hadn't reached it yet. And so I just want to know, when you first saw the news come through our emails around the 90-day pause, what ran through your mind?
I was really shocked. I'm still shocked. I never saw this coming. I still can't believe that it happened. Like I said, I've worked under multiple administrations, from Bush to Obama to Biden to Trump 1, and I never saw this coming. I really thought that, sure, new administrations come in and you work with their priorities, but at the end of the day, the U.S. soft power is something that is like a bipartisan, agreed concept that is very important for Republicans and Democrats. And I honestly just did not see this coming at all.
I know. It still feels like a weird nightmare that we're living through. When you think about the programs that were halted, what worries you most in terms of the communities that you are working with, but also the impact for Americans?
Obviously, my thoughts go to the kids. We know that 1 in 5 girls have experienced rape or sexual abuse, that 1 in 10 children in sub-Saharan Africa are orphaned, that children 0 to 4 were estimated to die from AIDS every 7 minutes. Our programs provided services to 13 million OVC and their caregivers. PEPFAR made sure that 7.8 million babies were born HIV-free. We protected 10.3 million girls from sexual abuse and 10 million children from trafficking, child marriage. and that has now been dismantled. That is very disturbing. But for me personally, I think a lot about my colleagues. I hope that people understand that Americans are one piece of this: civil servants, contractors, foreign service officers. But we hired tens of thousands of what we refer to as FSNs, foreign service nationals. So folks from the country that understand the country way better, than I ever could, understand what needs to be done, understand the culture, understand the priorities, can work with the governments in ways that I could not as an American, and just brought this amazing technical expertise. And working for the US government in some countries really was a risk for them, and the people that I worked with, in Africa, they had built their careers providing services with USAID, and now they are all out of work. And I just feel like they dedicated their lives to this work, and then we just betrayed them. And it's like this deep pain and this deep shame that I have every day, thinking about our FSNs and our implementing partners that we worked with, the organizations who worked in communities on the ground, and who now will not have funding. And just the abrupt nature of the stop in aid was so unexpected, and it really, really is just like a total tragedy. Yeah.
Well, and then you've done a lot of visits with members of Congress as well, who come to these different sites. Why were they coming to the sites, and what was their reception?
Yeah. So, as I mentioned before, PEPFAR is a bipartisan initiative that was supported by both Democrats and Republicans. This was started by George W. Bush, and we have seen incredible success. Everyone knows that, PEPFAR, if you put your money in PEPFAR, you get your return on investment.
Yeah.
We have saved 26 million lives. I mean, it makes me so proud to think that this is something that the US did. No other nation in history has done this. And so we would have what we call CODELs, congressional delegations, come to country, and we would take them to see the projects. And took a group of congressmen and their wives to see an OVC program in Pretoria, Future Families, led by this amazing social worker. And we showed them a mommy baby group that was working on parenting, evidence-based parenting. We showed them the worm farm, because they were developing fertilizer for their gardens, and took them around, and they saw the results of the work. We took them, to clinics to see DREAMS programs. DREAMS is an initiative that worked with adolescent girls and young women on HIV prevention. And they saw empowered girls and young women in their communities. They saw people receiving medication in clean, efficient clinics. And while the average American might not be able to find Zambia on a map, right? Or they might not understand what it means to strengthen the social welfare workforce in Cameroon. Congress members did see with their own eyes. And I'll never forgive them, actually. I'll never forget, and I will never forgive them for letting USAID be dismantled.
I mean, it's a real betrayal, right?
Yeah.
They knew, and they didn't do anything to stop this incredible, cruel blunder.
Yeah.
More than anything. But what you did say, is an interesting point. Not everyday American can find Zambia on the map. But what would you tell them in terms of why global development is important and will impact them in some way?
Yeah, I think it kind of, well, there's two ways of looking at this, right? Like the first way is thinking about Ubuntu and how we are all connected, and wanting to help others and provide a platform for folks to rise up and be able to provide for themselves and their families. But there's also another part where you're looking at it as an economist, as an economic investment, and understanding that this has implications on geopolitical stability, on our own national security, on Africa's security, on health security. Sub-Saharan Africa is the only region in the world where youth and working populations are growing. And we have this opportunity to take advantage of this amazing demographic dividend. When we work with population, there's a higher opinion of the US worldwide, which improves our national security, which increases our trade opportunities and strengthens our capacity to detect and respond to new epidemics and pandemics. And when that's taken away, we're all suffering here.
I know the first thing I think of really is COVID. When COVID was sprung upon the world, a lot of the systems that PEPFAR had put in place were utilized in order to track and contain COVID in many of those countries, as well as getting out treatments and vaccines to people that would needed them.
Yeah, and I think, and we saw during COVID just how much South Africa stepped up. Their health system is stronger after all of these years of investment, and they have amazing scientists who are able to do some really great research, and we saw a lot of that coming out of South Africa during COVID as a result of these investments.
So, Lauren, where in all of this are you finding hope?
Yes, it is difficult, right? I can honestly say that this is one of the most difficult things that I've ever been through in my life. Certainly, looking for a job is very humbling, and being inundated with the news every day can be very overwhelming. And it seems that like hope is actually the harder choice, right? Giving up and throwing in the towel is actually the easier way to do it. And I would just say that it's during this time of difficulty and frustration is when you become stronger. And I've been working with families my whole career to get them from vulnerable to stable and to build resilience. But building resilience is not comfortable. It's really hard. And I am very much out of my comfort zone right now. But remembering this concept of Ubuntu that we talked about before and relying on community and building community at this point is so crucial. And it's helped me so much. Like I have been so surprised at the number of people that reached out to me to just let me know that they're thinking of me. I'm so full of gratitude for my community at this time.
What would be something that you would ask, the listeners here to do to sort of keep this work alive, keep things moving forward?
I think from my perspective, it's not one action. It's many small actions. And let me explain. I think that sometimes the news can be very overwhelming, especially because, our modern times, we're aware of everything that's going on in the world. And it can feel so overwhelming to hear about things going on in Congo and things going on in Ethiopia and things going on in Ukraine. And you just feel so small and you feel like there's, who am I and what can I do? And it's really like my husband always says, you got to control the controllables. What is in your environment, in your community that you can do? I think just showing up for people in your community, showing up for someone, bringing food to a neighbor whose parent has passed away. It's putting sunscreen on your kids before they go to camp. It's doing little things with a lot of love every day and building community, like inviting people over for barbecues. We can't lose this community. And that's something that I have learned in my career. And I hope that I can continue to build community in my own life because that's the only thing that's going to help us, I feel.
Beautifully said, Lauren. That strong connection to humanity. I mean,
Yeah.
At the end of the day, I like to think that humanity is good. And so keeping those connections alive are very important. Well, we are at the end of our time together. And as always, it's been such a pleasure talking with you. Thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your story.
Absolutely. And if I can just say one last thing, just a thank you to all of the Foreign Service nationals that we worked with around the world. It was a pleasure to work with you, and just thank you for your service.
Truly brilliant people. All right. Thanks, Lauren.